And apart from giving credit to the Lord, I'd like to give credit to Mark and Helen van Koevering, because they are the ones who first said to me, you need to meet Alison Morgan and find out about Rooted in Jesus, because they had been using it in Nyasa, as Alison shared with us. And so one of the tasks I set myself when I went to the Lambeth conference in 2008 was to see if I could meet up with people who had this Rooted in Jesus. And indeed I did. And that's when we invited them to come to the Diocese of St. Mark the Evangelist. And I'm letting you in on a secret now, but I have a hidden agenda. Well, it's not so hidden. When I invite people to come to the Diocese of St. Mark the Evangelist, it's so that they can get a foothold in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. And if it works well with us, then we can export it to others. And that's what has happened with Rooted in Jesus. But I want to share with you a little bit of our experience, because we are an overwhelmingly rural diocese in the northern part of South Africa. People in other parts of Africa find it very funny when I tell them that we are called the far north, because they think of us as far south. Most South Africans think that South Africa finishes round about Pretoria, or maybe, I know when I lived in Pretoria, we sometimes went way up north as far as Bella Bella, warm baths, which we now call the deep south where I live. And if you want to get an idea of where we are, just in case you don't know, because I've discovered, especially with people in Cape Town, that you can't assume they know where anything is. We're that part of the circle. It is north of the Hex River Mountains. It's north of Johannesburg, north of Pretoria. I live in Polokwane, which is about 300 kilometers north of where we are now. And the diocese, which you can see mapped out there on the right, is almost identical to Limpopo province. It's about 500 kilometers east to west and about 400 north to south. And we have more of the Kruger Park than Mpumalanga Diocese has. So, let's go to the next one. Our diocesan vision is to make disciples in vibrant, self-sufficient congregations, established and linked to each other by sharing in resources, ministry and service, outreach and evangelism. Now that's the second version of the vision. Some years ago, that vision simply said to see vibrant, self-sufficient congregations, and so on. And we realized that there was something missing. It was a vision for maintenance, for surviving as the church. But we realized that actually our vision needs to be what Jesus said it must be, to make disciples. And so that's what we're all about. And everything we do in the Diocese of St. Mark the Evangelist is aimed to make disciples. Therefore, we decided, having experimented with Rooted in Jesus, that we would make it the standard for discipleship in the diocese. That doesn't mean we only use Rooted in Jesus, but it means it sets the standard. That gives the measuring stick by which we know whether we're making disciples or not. And so it's become foundational to everything we do in the diocese. For example, I followed the example of Mark van Koevering in Nyasa, and we said all confirmation candidates, before they do anything else in their training, must complete Book 1. And like Bishop Mark, I expect them to be able to recite the memory verses or give testimonies about how they have encountered Jesus and how they have grown to know him, grown as disciples during their confirmation training. And it's lovely, because now when I go to a confirmation, I have these young people dying to tell me and to tell the congregation about their relationship with Jesus. A few weeks ago, one of the young people stood up and sang a song that she had made up to memorize one of the verses. And so it's so touching to see Jesus making disciples out of confirmation candidates. we also then said, well, how about those who are lay ministers? We have a number of categories of lay ministers in the diocese. We have worship leaders, we have pastoral carers, we have preachers, we're busy developing evangelists and youth pastors. But we've said the fundamental, foundational training for all lay ministers of whatever category is rooted in Jesus. And for now we've said at least the first 2 books, but we'd like them to go through the whole course. We've said, what about diocesan organizations? In fact, we didn't say that. They said it to me. We had a Rooted in Jesus training event, and the Mothers Union president came to me and said, why can't we also have it? And I said, well, I suppose you can. And so the different organizations also are using Rooted in Jesus as a standard for how we make disciples amongst the people in the diocese. Same thing for people who are beginning their training towards the ordained ministry. Start by getting to know Jesus and becoming a disciple through Rooted in Jesus. And so this focus on discipleship and using Rooted in Jesus as the standard is starting to bear fruit in all sorts of ways. And I'd like to share a few of those with you. Just last week, I was in the parish of Matlala. Matlala is a large rural parish to the northwest of Polokwane. They don't have enough money yet to support a full-time rector, but Rapakle, the priest in charge, is at the conference somewhere. Are you here, Rapakle? No? But they gave a presentation this last Sunday after the service. And there you can see some of the pictures. At the bottom on the left are the children who have come to know Jesus. And they're praying for the others. Because the other children on the right were busy mocking them in the play. And then the children on the right were deeply convicted. And there they are all weeping for their sins. At the top are some of the younger children who did a lovely presentation, and I loved the banner that they came up with in the end, with the recycling motto saying, recycle your life in the name of Jesus Christ. Isn't that lovely? Now these are people in a rural, poor area who are beginning to discover what it means to be a disciple. And not only what it means to be a disciple, but to be a disciple who shares their faith with other disciples. Let's go on. Very often I find the confirmation candidates will do a drama about their faith, and there is a drama taking place. I had one of the girls in that picture, the one on the extreme left, as we look at it, standing right in front of me where I was, saying, Martin, do you know that God has a special plan for your life and loves you? Wonderful. And I said, yes, I do. And I'm so pleased that you do. And these dramas often incorporate memory verses. I met a young boy in one of our churches, about 10 years old, who they went to pray for the sick. It's a church of mainly children, and a group of children went to pray for the sick with one of the adult leaders, and he was quoting verses from Scripture as he was praying. And the leader said, how do you know all those verses? And he said, well, it started with Rooted in Jesus. I would memorize those verses. Now when I come home from school, after I've done my homework, I read the Bible and memorize it. So he was able to pray with authority because he was using God's words, not just his own words. Next one. I'm seeing new ministries emerging. That picture at the bottom where you see the bishop in the background was at a confirmation in extension 44. It's one of about 70 or 80 extensions between Seshego and Polokwane. It's a church that was started as a result of, it's really a Fresh Expressions church, as a result of taking soup to the community for 3 or 4 years. After that, the community came to those who took them soup every week and said, We've noticed what you do, and we'd like you to start a church here. And so the church started. But it's an unusual church. They have about 90 to 100 on average on a Sunday, of whom about 85 are children. So it's a church of mainly children. And that picture is special because you can see them holding certificates. Some of those are baptism certificates, some of them are confirmation certificates, and some of them are lay minister certificates. They had finished their training to be worship leaders, the same training that the adults did. One of them wasn't allowed to get a training because he was too young to be confirmed, wasn't allowed to get a license, but he got a certificate to say he could lead worship. And so I'm seeing life and ministry emerging. There at the top is again from a recent Sunday, all the people who were robed as servers and lay ministers and deacons and priests in one of our very, very rural parishes, where a few years ago there was hardly anyone. Again, as people begin to discover what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, ministries emerge. You can't stop them. They happen. I love what Archbishop Rowan Williams said, don't you? That what's it, when people begin together and do the things, come together and do the things of Jesus, then church happens. Church is a verb. It's something that happens as people become disciples of Jesus. At the bottom on the right of that picture is the newly established men's fellowship in one of the parishes. And what I'm finding increasingly as we have made discipleship our focus, using Rooted in Jesus, is that all these things are just bubbling up. Life, ministry, new fellowship groups, people offering themselves for ministry. Let's go to the next one. We're about next week, in fact, to start our new diocesan youth discipleship program. That happened because we had a bit of a crisis. Last year, just had a feeling that there were a few young people in the diocese who felt God may be calling them into the ordained ministry. So I sent a message around saying, any young people who feel God may be calling them into the ordained ministry, come and meet with me. And I was expecting about 6, and there were 35 of them who came. And then we said, oh dear, we'd better do something with these 35 people. We'd better start training them. And so we began to prepare a youth discipleship program, and the youth leaders came to me earlier this year and said, we wanted to start. And we said, well, we'll start next year because we need some time to prepare. And they said, no, it's starting in July. How can you say no when they do that? So next week, our first intensive youth discipleship program starts, and we'll be teaching them the basics of what it means to follow Jesus and then sending them out on mission. In fact, next week, they'll be having teaching in the mornings and then going out on mission in the afternoons and evenings. So what I'm saying to you, it's almost what we heard this morning. Focus on Jesus. Focus on making disciples. And almost by accident, all sorts of other things begin to happen. And then ministry becomes very easy because all you have to do is notice what God is doing and say, great, go for it. Encourage the people. Bishop Graham Craig calls bishops the permission givers. And that's our calling, to give people permission, if they need it, to become disciples of Jesus. So, just to remind you, go and make disciples, as Jesus said.